Peter Zeihan talks Jones Act. Better call Sal. I am the aforementioned Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to this episode of What's Going On with Shipping. So, a lot of topics, a lot of discussions about the Jones Act. We saw it down in Puerto Rico with two recent waivers of the Jones Act. We've heard it in the news recently with some very spicy conversation about the Jones Act. And now Peter Zeihan, who does geopolitics, has addressed the Jones Act in a video he recently did, and along with a newsletter. If you don't know Peter is a well-known author, great books. I love his stuff. I read it all the time. His articles are good. His videos are outstanding. I don't always agree with Peter, and as you're going to find out in this video, I don't agree with him entirely in this video. But he mentioned the Jones Act, which immediately sent the Sal signal up. I got ridiculous amount of notes from people saying that Peter has done this video and what was my reaction to it. So I figured I'd do a reaction video. Hadn't done a reaction video before. I'm going to go ahead and do one today. So we're going to delve into Peter's video. It's a very short one, only about 3.5 minutes. And we're going to kind of break it down, take a look at what he says, what I agree with and what I disagree with, and I think what he's missing. If you're new to the channel, take a second, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. All right, let's go ahead and jump into our reaction video. So I'm going to emulate one of my favorite YouTubers, and that is Vlogging Through History. This is a channel that reacts to other YouTube videos on history. And he has a format, he has a style. This is it. I am emulating, not plagiarizing. So here's Peter's video. I'm going to go ahead and play it, jump in at time to time, and we'll go ahead and see what Peter has to say. All right, take it away, Peter.
Hey everyone, Peter Zeihan here, coming to you from Richmond, Virginia, the Jefferson Hotel, which is like ridiculously glorious.
Seriously, that's a nice hotel. I mean, that's ridiculous. It's much better than the Motel 6s I tend to stay at. That's really nice.
Anyway, I wanted to talk about economic development in the United States today, something that's getting a little bit of play because we finally have an industrial policy. Well, I shouldn't say we have an industrial policy for the first time since World War II that's guiding things.
Is it industrial policy, or do we have a policy on some industries? Because I'm still waiting for the SHIP Act to pass.
Like semiconductors. And not that that's not important, and not that I don't support that, but there are a lot of really baseline things the United States could do if the goal is more stable and reliable economic growth at all levels. So specifically waterways. Now, moving things by water is less than 1/10 the cost of moving them by land. You can move things at bulk, you can move things at speed over large distances. It really is the way to go.
My buddy John Konrad did a video with Spire Maritime. I'll have it in the show notes. Excellent video. He breaks this down really well. Go watch that video.
However, the United States adopted a law about a century ago called the Jones Act, or the Interstate Commerce Act, if you want to use the technical term.
Okay. It's not the Interstate Commerce Act. The Interstate Commerce Act is 1887, deals with railways largely. The Jones Act is the Merchant Marine Act of 1920. It's a mistake, simple mistake. I'm not picking on Peter. But again, it goes back to the issue of what this act was. The Jones Act, when it was created in 1920, was designed for a very specific purpose. It came out of World War I. In 1914, when the world went to war and we declared our neutrality, we found ourselves in a bit of a quandary because piling up on our docks was commerce. It was exports, largely cotton, and more importantly, we weren't getting our imports in. And that nearly bankrupted the United States, created a huge economic problem. So we found ourselves with goods piling up on the dock, couldn't move them, and the one kind of reservoir of shipping we had was our coastal trade. We moved a great deal of goods around the United States, largely by ship. That cabotage fleet, or the coastal fleet, had been in existence since 1817 under a navigation act that was passed. But after World War I, we wanted to codify not just that law, but a series of other laws. And what we got was the Merchant Marine Act of 1920. It dealt with international shipping, it dealt with domestic shipping, it dealt with seamen's rights, it dealt with shipbuilding, it dealt with international freight rates, it created a federal entity, the U.S. Shipping Board, to oversee this. You name it. It had everything in it when it came to shipping. And it's kind of the very first national maritime strategy we ever had. And Section 27, again, you got to go through 27 sections to find this thing, is the coastal provision that just reaffirmed what had been the law prior to this. Matter of fact, you go back to the very first Congress, there are cabotage laws, the very first acts. But in the preamble of the Merchant Marine Act of 1920, it states its purpose, which isn't just economic. And this is the problem I have with a lot of economic determination of the Jones Act. It says right here that it is necessary for the national defense and for the proper growth of its foreign and domestic commerce that the United States shall have a merchant marine of the best equipped and most suitable types of vessels, sufficient to carry the greater portion of its commerce, it never says what percentage that is, and serve as a naval or military auxiliary in time of war or national emergency. And that is one of the keys, is that this isn't just for economic commerce. It's not just to move your goods from point A to point B, but in time of war and during national emergency, we need to be able to tap into this, which gives federal oversight of the merchant marine in a way unlike any other industry. In World War I and World War II, the merchant marine was nationalized. And that is something you don't see happen in many other industries. All right, let's go ahead and jump back over to Peter.
And what it does is it makes it illegal to ship any cargo between two American ports on any vessel that is not American crewed, captained, built, and owned.
An American flag.
And what this has done is reduce the amount of traffic that we use our waterways for by in excess of 90% over the course of the ensuing century.
Okay, I got to pause right there for a second, because he's saying that because of the Jones Act, the amount of American cargo that's moved by ocean has decreased by 90%. Okay, well, number one, we move a ton more cargo than ever before, so I'm not sure where this 90% comes from. Second, I completely disagree with that premise from the very beginning, because it is putting all the cause for this reduction of 90%, whatever the hell that is, on the Jones Act, when there are many other issues that impacted why we don't move things by ship. For example, the interstate highway system. Why? Because we had terrible roads in this country, but it's later President Eisenhower, who comes back and says we need to be like the Germans, which, again, you don't hear a lot of people say, but we need to build an Autobahn system. You have to remember, in 1956, Malcolm McLean, the creator of what we call intermodalism containers today, loaded his tanker, the SS Ideal X, in Newark, New Jersey, and sailed them down to Houston, Texas. And the reason he loaded containers on board is because if you had to drive those containers from Newark to Houston, Texas, it'd take you a long time. Today, if you did this today, if you left from Newark today to go to Houston, it's 25 hours drive, 20-something hour drive to do it. By truck, maybe 2 days. If you sail it, it's 5 to 6 days. If you load a container in New York, you now have an option. Drive it to Houston or put it on a boat. What's better? And granted, it is much more efficient environmentally to do it by boat. It really is. The problem is this. You now have to put that container on a truck. You have to put it on a truck, drayage it, short haul, over to the port. At the port, it has to be lifted off with a crane, kept at the terminal waiting for your ship to come in. Once the ship comes in, you have to load it on. That ship now sails. It probably doesn't sail directly to Houston, but stops at a whole batch of ports on the way. So it's probably not 5 to 6 days. It's probably a week or two till you get it. It now arrives in the port of Houston. Now you have to offload it. You have to put it in the terminal. You have to get another truck to come get it, put it on the back of the truck, and deliver it to your store in Houston. Is that more efficient than just putting it on a truck in New York and driving it to Houston? That's the problem, because the interstate highway system, which is heavily subsidized, which, again, we have low taxes on gas. I know that's going to drive people crazy when they hear it, but go look at Europe. Go look at Asia. We have low taxes on our fuel and highway system compared to other places. We incentivize cargo onto the highways. Now he's going to sit here and lambaste that, but we did. Also, the other method we moved cargo was by tankers. Well, you don't do that when you have an interstate pipeline system. Why is it we don't have 100 tankers going from Houston, Texas to New York? Because you have the Colonial Pipeline. There's no need for it. This is why when the Colonial Pipeline got hacked, we were in a lot of trouble, because we don't have the tanker capacity we once had before. And let's be clear, when the Colonial Pipeline was hacked, the danger there wasn't that you could refuel your car. The danger here was that airports, commercial and more importantly military airports, were running out of fuel. That was the issue. And there was no way to pick that up with tanker trucks. You need tankers to do that. And the only tankers we had available, fortunately, were Jones Act tankers, because at that time, the market was way up for tankers, and it was really difficult to find commercial tankers because no one wanted to do a short little run. They were looking at long hauls to make their money. And so you have to be very careful about this. I didn't even bring in airlines here, which sounds strange. But in 1958, when the first 707s and DC-8s do intercontinental service, that takes people off trains. It frees up Class 1 railways for freight. And again, that's more cargo that's moving that way. So to sit there and say, well, it's the Jones Act that causes this problem is a little bit, I would say it's not 100% accurate.
And so now we pretty much move about half of our products, almost 2/3 of our products by truck, and then the remainder is a mix of everything else. Trucks being the most expensive way to move things over distance by far. Now, for a state like Virginia that is on the Chesapeake, I don't want to say that this has been the kiss of death, but wow, has it ground down their economic opportunities. The Chesapeake Bay is the world-class best bay in the world. Has the most frontage in terms of areas for port siting. My home state of Iowa is bracketed by 2 navigable rivers, the Mississippi and the Missouri, putting Iowa in a position where it has passed up massive economic opportunities.
I have to question that a little bit I'm going to get back to Chesapeake Bay in a minute here, but the Iowa situation, I don't quite understand, because there is a plethora of traffic on the Mississippi River. I mean, we just had stories talking about the low water levels below Memphis right now. I mean, tug and barge, towboats, and push barges and push boats are all up and down the rivers here. I mean, most of the nation's grain is moved by these barges. So I'm not exactly sure what he's talking about in the loss of economic development along the Missouri and the Mississippi River in Iowa.
And then for 19 years, I lived in Texas, which has one of the best coastlines in the world. And
fourth largest coastline of states is Texas, behind Alaska, Florida, and California, if you didn't know it. The problem Texas has, I will tell you real quick, is dredging, is their harbors silt up like crazy. And so you need large-scale dredging to get in there to open them up. It also doesn't help they're in a cul-de-sac, which is the Gulf of Mexico. However, one of the things we do see coming out of Texas is energy in large numbers. And I talk about a Jones Act waiver or a Jones Act exemption in the terms of LNG. I'll link the video up above where I talk about this. I think if you're going to talk about a Jones Act exemption right now, the area we need to talk about is LNG, liquefied natural gas. There are some Korean-built LNGs for Russia that we can get our hands on very quickly. There are ways we can incentivize shipping on American flag LNG carriers, build up some money for some surcharges on foreign LNG carriers carrying American LNG so that we can build a shipbuilding fund to help build these types of vessels in the United States. But again, that's a whole separate story.
More deep water potential than the entire West Coast combined. Basically, if your state is on a navigable river or an external coast, especially if it's got a good bay like the Chesapeake or New York Sound or San Francisco, you have been missing out on massive amounts of economic activity for decades. The single best thing that the United States could do if the goal was to salvage the status of its second-tier cities and build out manufacturing would be to severely reform the Jones Act. Now,
let me be clear. I agree entirely with him on this reform. We need to reform this bill. It's an old bill. I mean, it's been around for 100 years. And it has been reformed. Let me be clear. It has been. The other problem is it's also been partially dismantled. And when you dismantle part of an omnibus bill like the Merchant Marine Act of 1920 was, you have unintended consequences. When you ended, for example, operational subsidies, and I'm not a big fan of subsidies, but when you end subsidies for building vessels for the international trade, you eliminate the construction of commercial ships in the United States. You're building less commercial ships, which makes Jones Act vessels more expensive to build. That's another big argument you hear. But I want to go back to something he just said about developing secondary and tertiary cities. The problem with that is in the 1970s and the 1980s, we saw the introduction of this, and that is the shipping container. And the shipping container has done many things. It has flattened the world. It has increased the level of living standards across the board. Read Mark Levinson's The Box, and then go read his book, Outside the Box, about globalization. And you realize what an invention Malcolm McLean, a truck driver from North Carolina, gave us. The problem with the shipping container is it did a couple of things. Number one, what we've seen happen in ocean shipping is consolidation of shipping companies. Today, the top 10 companies control 85% of all the world's ocean shipping containers. But we've also seen the consolidation of ports. Whereas we had dozens, if not hundreds of ports up and down the U.S. coast. Now we have handfuls. We're talking about the four-corner strategy for U.S. ports: New York, New Jersey, Houston, Savannah, L.A., Long Beach. We have second-level ports that are great: Baltimore, Boston, Charleston, Norfolk, Jacksonville, Miami, Mobile, New Orleans, Oakland, Seattle, Tacoma. Great. But these lower-level ports don't exist anymore. Why is it you don't bring ships into Manhattan on the finger piers, or to Brooklyn, or into New Haven, or into Newport, or these smaller ports? And it has to do with two things. Number one, real estate. Most of the waterfront areas have been bought up by real estate developers, either for commercial developments, businesses, restaurants, you name it, or for residential, for homes. The other is how we move cargo, and we move cargo by these big ocean shipping containers. A 40-foot container can be loaded with up to 30 tons of cargo. When you use a 40-foot shipping container, you need gantry cranes. You need a harbor that's dredged to accommodate vessels for this. You need a lot of laydown area to put these containers on. You need trailers. You need the gantry cranes to pick them up and put them on the trailers. You also need your infrastructure, your roads and bridges to the port to be able to handle 30 tons of cargo. One of the big problems you see outside of ports is where these container trucks and trailers spill over into other areas. They damage the roads. They damage the infrastructure. And you have to develop the means by which you can move this. It doesn't do any good to repeal the Jones Act if you want to develop the port of New Haven, Connecticut, but New Haven doesn't have the bridges to handle shipping containers, or doesn't have the road capacity to handle these containers. We need something smaller than a shipping container. We need something modular. We need something like an old Army Connex box that we can move. There's been a lot of examinations of short sea shipping over the years, and this is where it falls apart, in that you need something beyond the shipping container, but this is the mode in which we operate. Just by repealing the Jones Act doesn't fix this problem, because if you start developing these ports, you're talking about these little communities having to invest in their infrastructure, and that infrastructure is not going to be paid by the ocean shipping companies. We learned that with the Bayonne Bridge in Newark. When the ocean shipping companies went to bigger ships, it was the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey, it was the citizens of New Jersey who had to pay to lift the Bayonne Bridge so that bigger ships can get underneath it. It wasn't Maersk and MSC and all the ocean companies doing it.
Obstacle there, as you know from some of my previous presentations, the United States is going through a period of political reshuffling, and the factions that make up the parties are moving around. The faction that is most in motion is organized labor, and the two issues that organized labor is most concerned about are union membership and immigration. And on the union membership issue, all of the jobs that maintain those Jones Act vessels, those old, slow, inefficient ones that are the only ones allowed to operate, they're all union jobs.
All right, I don't know about you, but I friggin' hate stereotypes. And that is a stereotype right there. All Jones Act is union, and all the ships are old and slow. And man, I just, that is a stereotype. And that is a horrific stereotype. Are there union jobs in shipping? Sure there are. I'm not denying that by any means. We've seen it out in LA and Long Beach with the ILWU. We see it on ocean shipping with the plethora of unions on U.S. ships. One of the problems I think that's dogging the U.S. Merchant Marine, especially in the deep draft fleet, is we have too many friggin' unions. MMP, MEBA, AMO. Oh my God, it's bad enough to deal with one union, but imagine having to deal with four unions, SIU, you name it. It's a disaster. But on the Jones Act side, that is a mischaracterization. So this is Eastern Shipbuilding over in Salisbury, Maryland. This is on the Chesapeake Bay, the great Chesapeake Bay that Peter talked about, for American Cruise Lines, a local cruise line, a small cruise line that they cruise on, several hundred passengers on board. They do cruises up and down the coast, regional cruises, New England, Chesapeake Bay, the Southeast, up and down the Mississippi River, the Ohio River, Gulf Coast, and then the West Coast, especially the Columbia and the Snake. This is being built at a non-union facility in Maryland. And this is shipbuilding right there on the Chesapeake Bay. I'm not even talking about Huntington Ingalls that's building nuclear aircraft carriers and nuclear submarines. This is on the Eastern Shore where we're seeing this. And this is the big misconception. The big misconception is the Jones Act doesn't build vessels. We only build 1 or 2 vessels a year. That's not true. We build tugs, we build ferries, we build barges, we build, you name it, fishing boats, pleasure boats. All that is under the Jones Act. And by repealing the Jones Act, this creates a problem. Now, Peter's not talking about repeal. He's talking about reform. He's also talking about, again, old vessels. Well, the newest Staten Island Ferry incorporates a whole slew of new technology in its construction. We're seeing new propulsion being designed in, hybrid power, hydrogen, LNG power. All of this is being done. This was built down on Eastern Shipbuilding down in Panama City, Florida. This is the same shipyard, by the way, that's building the new offshore patrol cutter for the Coast Guard. So they're building commercial. They're building Staten Island ferries. They built the 343, which is the fireboat for New York City. They built tugs. You're seeing both military and commercial being used here. Again, this is a stereotype that all the Jones Act is union because people hate unions, and so they're going to immediately act negatively to this. There's a lot of Mississippi River traffic on towboats and barges that is not union in any way, and they're anathema to unions. And the same thing with the old rusted, vessels. I can find you old rusted vessels in every merchant marine around there. Now, are we building enough? No, because guess what? It is expensive to build in the United States, and we're not building enough in the United States, which means we have to invest more in this. We have to, because again, if you want to buy an F-150, you buy it off the assembly plant and it's a great low, it's affordable. But if you want to hand build an F-150, it's going to be expensive because you got to manufacture and fabricate all the parts yourself. And this is how yards in Japan, Korea, and China are able to do it. They build 93% of the world's ships. And what you're talking about here is ceding more of that over to them, making us more dependent on them for our ships, for our commerce, and potentially for crews. Top 5 nations that provide merchant mariners: Philippines, China, Indonesia, India, wait for it, Russia. Those are the top 5. And, is that where you want, manning the Staten Island ferry going across? So again, I just think that this is a little bit of a stereotype that needs to be addressed.
And so the unions see this as a job preservation act, despite the fact that it has cost the rest of the United States tens of trillions of dollars over the course of the last century. So if you want to get mad about something, get mad about Jones. If you want to call your congresspeople about something, call them about Jones. That is the best way that the United States could reindustrialize, protect its secondary cities, expand the port infrastructure, reduce its carbon footprint for transport, and ultimately make the United States a much stronger place moving forward. Easy fix. Okay, that's it from me. Until next time.
So I think Peter, he presents always a great case, and I think he's very masterful in what he does. But again, I take issue with some of those comments again there. The Jones Act is not the cause for all the problems. Again, there's a lot of merchant marines around the world have declined, much like ours, who don't have the Jones Act. So it's not that. The issue of decline of the U.S. merchant marine involves many more issues. And let's be clear about something, too. If the U.S. didn't want to decline, if post-World War II we decided to keep control of 63% of the world's trade, we could have easily done it. Because understand, we undertook issues that really put us at a disadvantage going forward. We repopulated our allies' merchant marines with ships. We basically gave them loans to rebuild their shipyards and use the new technology we had perfected during World War II prefabrication. We incentivized the creation of new registries: Panama, Liberia, the Marshall Islands, and most importantly of all, our Navy, which we invested in heavily during the Cold War and afterwards, provided the safety on the world's ocean so that other merchant marines and other nations didn't have to invest in naval protection because they were being protected by the U.S. And that's what Bruce Jones talks about in To Rule the Waves. That one of the greatest beneficiaries of the U.S. Navy was China and other nations that are now reaping those benefits. So I think there's a lot to look in this. I think Peter, as always, is a really intelligent, interesting person to follow. However, I do take some exception with what he said. I hope you enjoyed today's first reaction video. If you did, leave a comment. Give it a thumbs up. let me know what you thought about the video. I really like to know. But more importantly, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. Share it across social media. I'm sure you can send it to Peter. I'm sure Peter will enjoy watching this. It's a little bit longer than his videos, so I apologize about that. But more importantly, if you want to support the page, you can do that one of two ways. You can hit that super thanks button below, which allows you to contribute directly to the page, or head on over to Patreon and you can become one of my patrons. And you can support the page either monthly or yearly in whatever level you want to provide. I appreciate any assistance. Until our next video, this is Sal, signing off.